Hola a todos, les doy la bienvenida a nuestra edición número 20 de Inside Out, la primera que hacemos en vivo, y en esta ocasión es un mes muy especial. ¿En qué sentido? Es un mes muy especial porque se cumplen 65 años de la primera vez que se vieron John Lennon y Paul McCartney en Liverpool, allá por 1957, una tarde en una kermés en la que John Lennon se presentó junto a The Quarrymen y bueno, el resto es historia.
Es por eso que estaremos entrevistando a una persona muy especial. Esta persona es la hermana de John Lennon, Julia Birds, que está con nosotros desde Londres haciendo esta entrevista exclusiva. Welcome, Julia. Again, thank you for being with us today. The first question is regarding your childhood. How was living and growing up with your father, Bobby, and your mother, Julia? And what is the memory you have for that time?
Well, exactly what you would expect with a family. I had John as my older brother and Jackie, who is almost 3 years younger than me, our younger sister. And to us, our lives were no different to anybody else's in our neighbourhood. So all fairly normal. Though, now I look back, of course, I realise that it was not quite the normal setup. But we lived in an area that was largely Catholic, Católica, and many big families, many families of 9, 10 children. Often the older children had already married young, as they did, and they were coming back. Now, my brother was coming back, so it wasn't so strange that all the children weren't living full time in the house, because with these large families you can have a 4-year-old and a 24-year-old, and often 4 children would already be married and coming to visit. So it was a hodgepodge, if you like. And I didn't see it as so different until later.
Okay. Yeah,
and if I can tell you,
okay.
the very question you've asked is the one everyone asks. I've written the book in English some time ago, and just as lockdown happened, it was translated in Galicia, in Spain, into Spanish. And that's exactly the question you are asking. Can you read that? Can you have asked, "Creciendo con mi hermano John Lennon"? So that is your...
very good with the Spanish, Julia. Very good.
Del colegio. So there's lots of pictures that you were asking. It's
that will be excellent. Yeah, perfect. Second question, what was growing up with John Lennon before he was the most famous musician in the world?
John was 6 years older than me, and 9 years older than Jackie, younger sister. And so he did older brother things. He played with us. He took us to the park. He took us to the cinema to see Elvis. He was an integral part of our lives. I don't remember ever a life without John. He would have known a life without me and my sister because of the age difference. But as soon as I was born, we had John. He would come at the weekends. We all know the story of he lived with Mimi. We all know that story. And the book has set out to explain how it happened, why it happened. And it didn't happen the way many people think it did. I've wanted it in Spanish for a long time because there are so many Spanish fans. So John came to visit all the time, stayed with us all the time, school holidays, weekends. As soon as he got to high school at the age of 11, then often he didn't even go to school. he would get the bus up and then get another bus down like that to us and spend the day with my mother. And Jackie and I would go home at lunchtime to eat, and John would be there in his school uniform. There was never a question of sending him to school because the whole situation was so wrong that as soon as John was able, he found his own way to be with our mother, and she never said, "You've got to go to school." So he was there more than brothers who went to school because he was in the house. And last Saturday, back to Liverpool, to our village hall, where the church is, St. Peter's Church Hall, where we celebrated the 65 years of the day that John met Paul. Now, we were there that day, and there's fewer and fewer people who were actually there on that day. And when Rod, I'll tell you in a minute, when Rod said how many people were here on the 6th of July, 1957, there was me and two others put their hands up. So there's fewer and fewer people around to tell the story. But the Quarrymen are there. One has died, sadly, Eric, but the others were there, and we had Colin on drums. We had a tea-chest bass, as we used to have when we were younger, and then Rod and Len Garry singing, and they did all the old skiffle songs, and it was really, really good. Everyone's dancing, everyone's enjoying themselves, and that was 65 years to the day that they met. So all that was going on in our kitchen at home, because my mother, two of the mothers said, you can practice, rehearse here. And we had this since John was 13, 14. He had groups, because they were groups then, not bands. A band was an orchestra with violins, cellos, pianos, serious pianos.
Yeah.
A group was, a rock and roll group. So there were groups. And John had various groups called Johnny and the Rainbows, Johnny and the Moondogs. So you can imagine whose group it was, can't you? They're all Johnny and something or other. And this is before the Quarrymen. So we'd had all this practicing going on in our kitchen for a long, long time. And Jackie and I used to just go out to play because they'd all pile in, and it was just so noisy. I mean, it was interesting, but it was noisy. And sometimes our friends would come, and the back kitchen door would be open, and they'd all listen in, and then we'd go and play. So when the Quarrymen did that day, from 1965, it was only what they were practicing in the kitchen. We didn't hear anything else. It was exactly the same because they'd been rehearsing day after day after day for this church fete. So it was 65. It was sort of special. I mean, we don't know who's going to be here at 70 years. There may be nobody left at all, not even the Quarrymen. We don't know. So we'd heard it all before. And the other house that they were allowed to rehearse in was Colin Hampton's, the drummer. But his mother said, I go shopping on Saturday afternoon and you can rehearse as long as you're out when I get back. Whereas my mother said, come, and she would pick up an instrument and play along with them. So they were the two houses that they were allowed to practice in.
Unbelievable. Yeah, nobody think in that moment that he will be Sean Lennon, right?
No.
I mean, okay, yeah, that is a very cool story, Julia. So you have a memory that you can relate with the first approach that Sean has with the music? I mean,
No, it was a sort of musical family. My father liked opera. He went to watch it, but and sang in the house. So just as a working man, he liked opera. He liked Caruso as well, and so that was going on. But he didn't play an instrument. But my mother played the banjo that her father had brought back from sea when he retired from the Navy. He brought two things home. One was a monkey, and the other one was a banjo. And we've heard many tales of the monkey. We never saw it. Many, many tales of the monkey running around the house. A little monkey he brought back. And the other, the banjo, used to sort of live in my bedroom, because I had a big bedroom with a cupboard, and it was in the back of the cupboard, not to be touched. But when the Quarrymen played, Rod tells me that the banjo that my mother was playing then was his. She would take his banjo from him and leave him to play guitar. And her banjo was upstairs, but that's the one that John learned on. She probably didn't want this dum, 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 on her precious banjo. So she used his. But I remember my mother teaching John to play the banjo. And when he first started to play, and Rod Davis related this story on Saturday, when he first started to play, John was playing banjo chords, 4 chords instead of 6. John was playing banjo, and Paul is left-handed, you all know, and he didn't know that you could get a left-handed string guitar. So he played the guitar upside down. He was playing it this way. So that's how the Beatles started, with a banjo and an upside down guitar. That was the beginning of the Beatles.
Julia, ¿qué nos podés contar de la faceta activista y de la lucha por la paz de John?
Yes. Well, yes, he was an activist. Yes, he was an activist for peace. And we all know Give Peace a Chance and Montreal. And we know about these things and the marches in New York. And at the same time, we were all marching here in Paris. I went to university in France. So we were in Paris marching against the war in Vietnam, while John was in America doing it. We were back in London marching for the same anti-war. Never stop, says it. We're still marching for anti-war, for the madness of war. We're still marching against the madness of war. But in those days, it was huge. Everybody went. We stopped the cities. Everybody went. And they really had to listen. Nowadays, I don't think they hit it hard enough. It's sad that John isn't here, because I'm sure he would be at the forefront of the peace rallies, marches.
For sure, yeah. Julia, you remember the last time you had contact with John?
Yes, it was on the phone. It was in November 17th, on November the 17th in 1980.
Okay. And we came back to your book, okay? So in your book, imagine this, you tell us about Sean's childhood, right?
Yeah.
Is there something pending in those pages that you want to share with us, Julia? Something that's maybe in that moment you don't put in the pages, but you want to share?
No, because in the book I've put everything that the fans, you need to know. You do not need to know about what we ate for dinner or anything like that. You don't need to know these things. The book had a specific agenda. And that was the stories. John died in 1980, we know. And in 1985, now this is in the book, there was a Panorama program. Panorama was a serious BBC One respected program that did big investigations. And in 1985, they did a commemoration of John's having died 5 years previously. At the time, my 3 children, one was only very young, and I had 2 teenagers, and they wanted to watch it. And I steered them away from all this after John had died, because it was nothing but upset for us.
Yeah.
But this program, they said, Mummy, everyone in school will see it. So I said, okay, I understand that. You're going to be the only ones in school tomorrow that haven't seen it. And that's not right. So we sat and we watched it together, the 3 of us. And I was devastated because I stayed away from everything. We'd moved house. Nobody knew about John. It's the way I wanted it to be at that time. I was busy getting my life back together. And it was so wrong on so many counts that I was stunned. I mean, this is the BBC, the respect. I don't know what you have in Argentina. I don't know. But in the UK, at that time, it was the place to go for the truth about everything. And there, it wasn't only not the truth, it was lying. And where they got it from? So we're living in an age now where everything is known across the media, and how much is true, how much of it is true. But these were the days when you could telephone someone and the person you were trying to speak to would pick the phone up. Never happens now, does it? You've got to do 10 waits and pressing this and this and this, and then you're told there is no one available, but we value your call. Right. So I found out the number of the producer for that program. And I rang him and he picked the phone up straight away. I remember his name. He said, yeah. And I said, right. I said, I watched your documentary last night with my children. And I would just like to say that I think you got a lot of it wrong. And he said, who are you? So I said, I'm John's sister. And he said, John doesn't have any sisters. I said, you're speaking to one. He said, no, we have done thorough research. And John doesn't have any sisters. Where'd you go from there? Where'd you go? This is what we were fighting. And in the end, the book was the only way that I could do it. And an American journalist said he enjoyed the book. He said, it is a love letter to your mother. And that was right. Absolutely. It wasn't about John. It wasn't about me, certainly. It was about my mother and how she had been maligned by initially the BBC in the UK, so everyone believed it. Julian wasn't even mentioned. John had a son, Sean. I said, what about Julian? In the end, I put the phone down. So the book isn't about what we have for dinner. The book is about how John came to live with Mimi, why, and what the repercussions were. And they were worldwide, weren't they? In fact, you got John Lennon. We lost John the brother, you got John Lennon. You got the icon.
Yeah. I mean, the medias have that kind of issues, right? They say something and the people believe what they say, and it's not always the truth, right?
That's right, yeah.
Julia, te quería preguntar, ¿cuál crees que ha sido el legado más grande que nos dejó John?
The best.
He said, what do you think has been the greatest legacy that John Lennon left?
I thought you said that. Greatest legacy. Well, I suppose you've got to. It comes down to give peace a chance. Imagine that's the same rhetoric, isn't it? It's the same narrative. It's the same thing. I think John will be remembered as a creative genius who was interested, more than interested, in trying to establish peace, along with many, many other people, famous and not famous. There are many people whose names you will never, never hear, who spend their lives fighting for these things. They don't live in apartments in New York either.
So, Julia, from our side, we are totally happy to have this call with you. Really, we are. I don't know if you want to add something to the interview.
No, right. In Buenos Aires, I've been twice. Please, can I say hello to Rodolfo in the Cavern Club in Buenos Aires, and to Estefi Lennon, who is one female John, and she is coming to Beatle Week at the end of August, and I will meet her then. And I can't think. Maria, I think Maria Sierra. We email all the time from when I was in Argentina. We're internet friends, if you like. So I'd like to say hello to her. Well, there are a lot of people that were very, very kind to us, but I think that's it.
Okay, perfect. So if you come to Argentina anytime, please contact us, Julia, so we can, you know the mate, for example?
I do know mate, look.
Excellent. Oh my God! Yeah.
that is a present. It's silver. That is a present from Rodolfo.
Excellent. Okay, well, Julia, we finish with this beautiful interview, honoring this great month where two of the greatest musicians of the history has met. Thank you for your time and see you soon.
Hemos terminado todo por hoy y ojalá les haya gustado tanto como a nosotros. No dejen de seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales para enterarse de todo lo que se viene en nuestras próximas entrevistas y próximas ediciones. Un abrazo grande para todos y nos vemos.